the best. Yeah.
Okay.
And I teach a course, Education and Conflict, in which I use your book, Education and Conflict, Complexity and Chaos. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it was still okay. I think I won a prize with that one, I think. Yeah, I did. Oh, yeah, lots of people. And so I'll talk for a bit and then we'll see if there's any questions.
yes. Yeah. So we have roughly an hour. Yep. And, you can, once your presentation is over, usually students and, participants have questions for you. And I'm hoping that they would have today as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll just talk for, I think you said about, well, stop me if I go on too long. Okay.
Okay, we're starting.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the EduTalk series. This platform at Lum School of Education continues to serve as a confluence of thought leaders, researchers, and educators. As we unravel the complex tapestry of education, these talks not only bring clarity, but foster a shared vision for a brighter educational future. It is a great honor for us today to host another luminary in the field of education, Professor Lynn Davis. Holding the title of Emeritus Professor of International Education at the University of Birmingham and wearing the hat of co-director for the social enterprise Connect Futures, Professor Davis's work is both vast and impactful. Her relentless pursuit to understand the intricate dynamics between education, conflict, and extremism has paved the way for critical interventions in conflict-affected regions. With a rich legacy of collaborations from UNESCO to GIZ, her work has touched diverse areas from countering racism to strengthening social cohesion. Her formidable contributions to literature include revered titles such as Education and Conflict, Complexity and Chaos, Educating Against Extremism, and Unsafeguard Security, Secularism, and Schooling. Moreover, Professor Davis's service to global community was aptly recognized when she received the Sir Brian Urquhart Award, a testament to her commitment to the ideals of the United Nations. Today, Professor Davis will embark on an insightful journey with us as she explores the multifaceted relationship between education and conflict. In a world that is increasingly polarized, understanding the dual role of education as both a potential exacerbator and healer of societal rifts, it is very critical that we understand these relationships. She will delve into the nuances of gender dynamics in conflict, the intersections of education, extremism, and religion, and most importantly, she'll shed light on what truly works in peace education. Professor Davis will guide us towards understanding how an education rooted in rights, critical thinking, and idealism can be our best defense against radicalization and conflict. Please join me as we will welcome Professor Davis. So over to you, Professor Davis.
Thank you, Hashem. I hope everyone can hear me okay. And I'm very honored to do this at a great distance. It's midday here, cold. So it's a nice thing to do on a cold October day. So I'm looking forward to presenting and to answering any questions you might have. Please do get your questions ready. Nothing is worse than you come to the end and somebody says any questions and there's this silence. So you need to get your questions ready. I hope what I'm saying is provocative enough. I'm going to share a PowerPoint if that works. Let's see. And then I can talk my way through that. Don't want that one. I had it just now, didn't I? Desktop one. Damn. We had it up, didn't we? Share screen.
Yes, you did.
I did. So where is it? Might be this one. Pakistan. It's a bit of a giveaway. There we are. And I'll go to slideshow. That's working? No. Slideshow. Play from start. There we are. How's that? Hope this works.
Yes, it's visible. Yes.
It's visible. Okay. All right. So the title is something very broad: education, conflict, extremism, which is the sort of areas that I work in. And you've had a synopsis already from Hashem. Let's just start with a little bit of a recap, I think, for most of you. Two phases. Education, does education help to ameliorate conflict or does it make it worse? And the answer is both. And I think you probably know these. I won't read them out to you, but on the left-hand side, you've got some examples of, whoops, nope. You've got some examples of good things about education. Higher education is a lower risk of armed conflict. You expose young people to ideas, there's greater gender equity and so on, and literacy, and livelihoods, which is important. You lift people out of poverty so they don't join groups, extremist groups. On the other hand, and there's a lot of research on this, if you learn hatred or intolerance of others through biased curriculum, you learn hate, you learn nationalism, you learn just to obey authority, you learn that there's only black and white and there's nothing in between. A lot of schools are segregated by, in many countries, by ethnicity or by religion, and that doesn't help in learning to live together. It doesn't help in social cohesion. Normalization of violence. I'll say some more about that as well. And excessive nationalism. Schools and students are often subject to attack and violence from outside. They're seen as targets, and so they can be, soldiers will come in and take the schools over. I don't know where that was. But also, violence inside the school is seen as a solution to a problem. And there's a lot of work going on around what we call corporal punishment. I don't know what you called it, beating, punishing, hitting kids by teachers. And anything like that, of course, normalizes violence. It's okay. It's, you know, it solves a problem. I'll come back to all of these things. We did some research in Angola, and I just loved this one. And one of the kids said, our teacher is very good. He only hits us if we don't learn. And I thought that just sums up, you know, this notion that you could be hit if you don't learn. And that's what these children were learning in their school, as well as everything else. So we're trying to see, I'll come back to this, you know, not normalizing violence, but there's a lot of campaigns about stopping corporal punishment in schools. and very difficult to do that. Some of the parents want teachers to hit their kids. I was asked, I think, to say something about gender. That's fine. A lot of research on gender and conflict, and that's an interesting one. Violence against women is a predictor of whether a society is more prone to violent conflict. So if there's a lot of violence against women, that's a society which is more prone to violence in general. It's a benchmark. And the larger the gender gap, the more likely a country is to be involved with conflict. And if there's violence against women, that country doesn't necessarily comply with international norms. And also, women aren't involved in decision-making about war, about counter-terror. Now, this is the British War Cabinet in 1941. What do you notice about this picture? Any ideas? Washam, you're the only one I can see. What do you see in this picture?
They're all men.
They're all men, of course. This is 1941. So all these men are the people making decisions about war. However, this is Ministry of Defence apprenticeships 50 years later. What do you notice about this picture?
There's only one woman.
There's one woman.
There is gender differentiation.
And I'm not convinced she's actually part of it. You know, she looks as if she's just on the edge, you know, about to go and get the tea, don't you think? It's all men again. So I haven't got anything for Pakistan, but that's your next piece of research, all you students. You've got to try and get the gender breakdown of who makes decisions in your country about war, about conflict, about extremism, about counter-terror strategy. And
it could be the same as 1941 picture of British War Cabinet.
How do you know?
Because,
anyway. Probably is ministry. Anyway, it's fun looking at all of that because it's extraordinary how we've got used to that. Okay. Let me move on to extremism, which is something I've worked on for a long time. Again, these are just reminders really about education extremism. Terrorists are often highly educated. And it's not that terrorists haven't been to school. They're often highly educated. They've often been to university, colleges, whatever. But of course, they don't learn their extremist skills in school. And I won't go into this, but there's a very complex mix of motives to join extremist groups, to take part in extremist activities, to go and be a foreign fighter. It's not a single pathway, and I think we've learned that over the years. We used to think that there was this pathway you could spot a terrorist, you know, in the initial grades, and if you just tracked that person, you would find out. It's not like that. It's very, very complex, and people go up and down, in and out of movements. And there's a lot of intersectionality between extremism, gangs, drugs, and violence. And so we found from some of our research that young people will start life in a gang just with knives, but then they need an excuse to do that. So they switch over into some extremist, perhaps religious movement to justify why they're killing people, and maybe come out and go back into gangs again. So it's very complex, that movement. Religious extremism is the hardest to break for reasons which I don't need to spell out for you because it's all about ideology. And it's very difficult to critique religion. And so, like conflict, schools don't always protect against extremism. Let me talk about religion, because I think, again, I was asked to do that. I use this, what I call the amplification spiral. A lot of my work is complexity theory and amplification, which I won't bore you with today. But what I'm trying to see with this one is if you start on the left-hand side, religions are exclusive. You can't really be a Muslim and a Christian at the same time. They are exclusive. You're one or the other, or one of 3 or one of 10. If it's exclusive, there's always a danger that you see your religion as better than other religions. Otherwise, why do you do it? Why do you stay within one religion if you don't think it's a better religion than other religions? And however much you pretend that, you know, it's all equal, that's a nonsense. Once you think your religion is superior, it's the next step through this spiral is intolerance, that you don't really tolerate people who are of different religion. And then, of course, you think that God is on your side. And finally, you've got to expand your religion for God. And so there's an amplification spiral in religion, whereby you start off simply being exclusive, but it's not difficult to then get into a mindset of feeling superior to people from other religions or none, and feeling that God is with you. Whatever you do, it's okay because God has sanctioned that. There's quite a lot of research on national security and religion, and it tends to show that religious armed conflicts are more intractable than non-religious conflicts. That's because conflicting issues that come from religion are indivisible. You can't bargain over them. You can't negotiate. You can't say, I'll give you the loaves and the fishes if you give me, you know, things from your text. You can't say, oh, you know, let's exchange, let's have a bargain as you would do in religion. So they're indivisible. The conflicting issues are almost permanent. So multi-faith dialogue, which is a thing I know that many of you will be involved with, but it's probably more important to stop conflict going into the religious realm, because once conflict is part of that religious realm, identities become hardened and the power blocks are lined up and the expansionism becomes extreme. I'm jumping through all of these, but you can see. Good news about religion, it does provide some personal security for individuals, for groups. And looking at conflict, faith-based groups are often very good at picking up the pieces after conflict. They will go in and with humanitarian aid and so on. So they're often very good. And liberation theology, I'm always very interested in. Campaigning on behalf of the poor, the oppressed, started in Latin America, if you recall, but now in a lot of different places. So they do campaign. So there is some good news. It's not all bad about religion. I always have to say that. But I always think that religion actually does more harm than good. I would say that, wouldn't I? Because I'm a very committed secularist. But I like this Weinberg quote, which I shall read it to you. And you may know this one. Religion is an insult to human dignity. With or without it, you'd have good people doing good things and evil people doing evil things. But for good people to do evil things, it takes religion. I'll leave that thought with you. Let's move on. I spent a lot of time looking at peace education, working with outfits like UNESCO and so on, who are very concerned about peace education. But what I've done, I've looked a lot about what works in peace education and what doesn't work. And what doesn't work is just giving kids moral messages about love and harmony. You can't just go to kids and say, you must live together. You must live in a harmonious thing. I mean, it's not harmful, but it's not going to change anybody. It's not part of, it's not creating a different mindset. And of course, even if you persuade somebody that there's love and harmony, as soon as there's a problem in society, you go back to your old ideas about who was responsible and who was responsible for this crime, who was responsible for this. It's difficult. Secondly, I've got these 5 things that don't work. Secondly, I'm uneasy about tolerance. It sounds nice, doesn't it? Sounds nice. But of course, then how do you give young people clues about what to tolerate and what not to tolerate? I don't tolerate violence. I don't tolerate female genital mutilation. I don't care whose religion it is. But there's lots I don't tolerate. You've got to find a mechanism by which young people can learn what to tolerate, what's okay, and what they don't tolerate, what they're going to campaign about, what they're going to say, we don't believe in all of that. So just blanket things about you should be tolerant also don't work. Thirdly, what doesn't work is the sort of stereotypes of multicultural education. You just learn about what other people do, what we used to call the sari, samosas and steel bands. You get the kids and learn about other people's cultures and the food they eat and the church they go to. And it's cementing the idea that they're other, they're different, rather than finding a common thing that you've all got. You can't do simple counter narratives. You can't say, oh, well, that ideology is wrong, here's another one. And you can't do, and this is linked to all of this, one-way communication from teachers and authority people. It's just standing in the front of the class and telling kids to be good, don't join things, don't carry knives. Kids just ignore it. I don't know about what's happening in Pakistan, but we've had a lot of police going into schools and saying, don't carry knives. And the kids go, they just ignore it. They've got to carry knives. They've got to protect themselves. So the police going in and saying, don't do this, don't do that. Not very useful. Okay. So what does build resilience? And here's my 5 good things. A rights-based education, first of all, because if you have a rights-based education, that's when you learn what to tolerate, what not to tolerate. You learn that you've got the right to freedom from harm. You've got the right to freedom from violent punishment. And if you do, then other people do as well. And you learn what's a right and what's not a right. And I think I say somewhere else, yes, on number 4, you learn that religions don't have rights, people have rights. So you can't say, oh, this religion has the right not to be offended. No, there is no right in international law not to be offended. And we are seeing, I don't know about Pakistan, but we're seeing a lot of what we call woke, you shouldn't say this because it might offend somebody. And my view and many others is that education is about learning to live with offence, learning to live with it, learning to sort out what's, how you manage rather than complain. So I'm worried about what we call the snowflake generation. So yeah, rights-based education, I'm doing very fast really here. Critical thinking, interrupting black and white views. Does this make sense? And enjoyment of complexity. It's always tempting to look up, just find the answer to something. But it's enabling young people to say, actually, I changed my mind. Actually, I need to go and look at the evidence for this. Actually, I'm not quite sure. And particularly now with fake news and disinformation, you've got to find mechanisms by which young people are understanding complexity and who's making the news, who's telling us the truths, what are the truths, can you tell? So that's an important one. Third thing, if you can get young people to understand where conflict comes from, where hate comes from, where extremism comes from. I was doing some work in a school, and one 7-year-old said to me, Miss, she said, why do people have to hate each other? And I said, yeah, really, I don't know. It's a difficult one, but young people want to know. They want to know where it comes from and how they can stop it. My 4th one is a critical understanding of the role of religion. As I said, religions don't have rights. This is controversial always, because certainly religious schools don't like young people having any critical understanding of that religion at all. So it's not popular, but it's the idea that you can see at least some parts of religions and sacred texts as being person made. They're not necessarily all coming down from on high. And so it's looking at some of the worst bits of religion, some of the misogyny, some of the violence in sacred texts. And it's quite appalling, some of them. The Bible's terrible about telling people to go and kill people and hit people. And finally, by 5, critical idealism. What I've got is that we want young people to be idealist. We don't want them joining extremist groups, unless it's a group that we, of course, believe in. But we want a critical idealism. We want young people to participate in a democracy, create change, learn the skills to create change. And I don't think in schools we do enough here about those skills. How do you create change? It's not just telling people things. It's political skills. How do you do lobbying? How do you set up a group? How do you do the finance of that group? How do you collect money? How do you work out the best ways through to get the democratic ideals that you want? So there are skills that you can use. It's not just saying to kids, be democratic. I'll come back to these if you want me to in any of this. Yes, and we want them to question things. This is my favorite ever piece of graffiti. And it was on a wall and somebody said, question everything. And somebody had written underneath, why? I like that. We want to be understanding extremism, radicalization. A lot of the work that we do in Connect Futures, which is the organization that I work with, training young people. And the sort of training that we do is exposing them to how radicalizers appeal. What do they promise you if you want to join their group? And it's done through the images, it's done through the promises of a better life, it's done through status. For a lot of young men, there's status. For people without much money, the groups will offer them a salary. Salary's a bit, but money. So we go through the different ways in which radicalizers appeal to young people, the sort of images they use on the web. And it's we have to update these almost daily because it's bombarded with images and things that will appeal to kids, and especially now the world of gaming. And that's a way in because they're playing the games and you can get them as they play their games to become part of a network, and then that network starts to become something sinister. So we do a lot on fake news, on myths and disinformation, on imagined grievances, that that everybody has a grievance, but they're not necessarily real. We use former extremists to tell their story and what the reality of life is if you join ISIS, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram. The people who've come back, been there, done it, got the t-shirt, and what it's really like, and or how that first one, the appeal, that's shown to be a myth, and they don't necessarily get much money on the contrary. We had one testimony where he actually had to buy his own bullets because the group didn't give them to him. So the testimonials from victims and survivors, I think these are very powerful. So trying to work with young people with either face-to-face if we can, but we've made a lot of videos as well. You can look on our website and you can see the sort of videos that they're all freely available of former extremists or gang members talking about their experiences. I don't do any of the training with young people. I would have no credibility, but we've got some really credible, younger people who've been there and they've been through prison, everything, drugs, the lot. And they're able to convince young people, we hope, not to go down that same path. Right. Yeah, I'm done. There we are, half an hour. So just to summarize, and then I can do some more if you want me to. Sort of building blocks. At the bottom of this is do no harm. The least you can do is have a school or a college or an educational institution which doesn't do any harm. It doesn't beat kids. It doesn't encourage other kids to beat each other. And that goes into the next one up, which is non-violence. So if you do nothing else, try not to harm young people in the schools they go to with, say, a harmful curriculum which tells stereotypes about other races or other ethnicities, other religions. So do no harm, non-violence, and parallel to that, a rights framework, so young people understand their rights and that they have a responsibility to accord those rights to others, and they understand what's a right and what's a need and what the difference is. In the middle of all that is critical thinking. You know what critical thinking is. Always on the left-hand side, tackling gendered violence, not just because it's good for women and females, but because it's actually good for society. It actually makes that society better if you have a more gender equal society. And you tackle gendered violence. And you tackle on the right-hand side, marginalization, grievance, trying to work out why young people are angry. Why are they wanting to join groups? Why are they wanting to protest? Where is this rage coming from? And is it justified? And finally, active participation, but with critical idealism, not just joining a riot, not just smashing shops or something. We're having a lot on, are you Just Stop Oil? A lot of young people joining these things, and some of it is actually quite nasty. They are, smashing shops and things just because they think they are supporting the oil industry. So it's finding ways that you can participate actively without causing more harm. I think I'm going to stop there. That's exactly half an hour. How's that?
Thank you, Professor Davis, for this enlightening presentation. And we are now going to open the floor for question and answers. But if I can ask the very first question, take this privilege. You've talked about this, how religions at their very core are intolerant. And I thought that was very fascinating, that spiral that you showed us, that how it escalates. What are your views about teaching religion in schools? And, because a lot of schools, and in particular here in Pakistan, it's a very crucial aspect of education, teaching them about Islam. And then how is it that if a school is teaching religion, then how do they navigate that space where, you promote understanding of religion as opposed to promoting intolerance and extremism?
My view on this, which isn't very popular, is actually a secular education, which doesn't mean you don't talk about religion at all, but you might talk about a lot of different religions. You might see what they've got in common. You might see where they diverge, although I think that's tricky. My view is that if you can find some way of enabling young people to stand back from their religion, which is not popular with religious leaders, but to stand back and say, we have to admit that a lot of religion is a social construct. It was, and religious leaders say, no, it's all come down from God, Allah. But if you can say, well, no, did Allah actually want women to be beaten? Because that's what they're told. So if you can get teachers and young people to say, not everything in there is something that we want, and that's a lot of the extremism work does just that, and say because a lot of the ISIS people will say, oh yeah, the Quran says you should do this, this, and this, which it does, but you have to then say, well, no, they've obviously taken things out of context. But I think that critical understanding of where things come from and how people use it, how do extremist groups or violent groups or religious leaders use sacred texts and teachings in order to make children obey rather than question. It's a very difficult area. I haven't got the answers to it, but my ideal would be to get some sort of critical sense into learning about religion, that it's not just about learning the texts and learning the moral messages. It's about understanding where it came from and why. But I'm not very popular if I say it. What do you think?
I personally believe that school is no place to be taught religion. Maybe people should do it at school, at their homes. But I do agree with some sort of a secular understanding in schools in terms of not just one religion, but a general understanding that, where their people have these sort of views, how you kind of engage with them. So that is something I would also agree with. So the talk has been really well because we have more than 50 participants and I see them posting questions in chat as well. Nusrat Baki has posted a question where she's asking, how can family dynamics, values, and upbringing influence an individual's susceptibility to religious extremism? And what can families do to promote tolerance, understanding, and counteract extremist tendencies within their own homes?
That's a very interesting question and something that we've been engaged with a lot. We did some research on former extremists and their family backgrounds. And the other people who were doing the research thought that they'd been brainwashed by their own families into this. And I think our research said it was a lot more complex than that. I think the family is important, and our former extremists said yes, families can and should always try to do all the things we've been talking about. Make children have an open mind, not to do hate, not to do violence. But it's hugely difficult. We've got some films that we use of a mother whose kid went off to join ISIS and he was killed. And she says, we never suspect. It's a lovely family, very highly educated, not particularly extreme. And the kid was very good at sport and he was very good at school, and it was a complete mystery. I think kids do slip through the net and the families can't be blamed for not. A lot of people said, oh, they should have known, they should have known, they should have known. And I think it is really hard. But a lot of our former extremists say, the family is important, and the family was what got me out of it in the end when I came. And I talk, and the family, depending on how you see it, of course. And for a lot of former extremists, it was actually getting married, having children, creating a family of your own, which got them out of the gangs and the extremism, because they wanted to protect their own children. So family, if you've got one, it can be really, really important. Does that answer that question a bit?
Nusrat, please do post in chat if you are, if there is further questions that you would like to ask Professor Davis. I see Arsalan wants to ask a question. Arsalan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davis, for such a productive talk. Just 2 points, those are my concern from your presentation, and it got my attention also. One is, you mentioned somewhere terrorists are highly educated, which is really an astonishing point for me. And I just want to ask from where they learn this thing. Like, if they are educated, they know things, what are they, and how to deal in a society, and how to talk to someone, how to guide someone, from where they learn thing. And the second point is, if you said religious extremism cannot be uprooted, but we can, it's a bit difficult to uproot that. If we can't, how can we mitigate, and what kind of steps we can take to mitigate the religious extremism in our society?
Okay, let's do the first. What was the first one? Was what was your first question again? I'm to see if I can put them together.
Yeah. Actually, I asked, terrorists are highly educated. You mentioned somewhere.
Okay, let me do that one first. Yeah, I mean, it's they've done a lot of research on the educational backgrounds of terrorists, And you find that, well, there's some research that they do mostly science, engineering. They do subjects where you don't have a critical appreciation, where you don't question anything. You just do it. Therefore, their education doesn't prepare them to think critically about society. A lot of engineers and people will dispute that with me and say, no, that's a stereotype, you know, of these sort of things. But it is, I mean, the facts are there that they often are. And also they're highly educated and they will be, you know, leading. They don't themselves go out and kill people often. They then, you know, use that education for management and for you know, gathering funds and so on. I mean, the extremist groups, particularly ISIS and well, all of them, are highly sophisticated criminal networks. They're not just a bunch of radicals sitting in a room, you know, going on. It's a very, very sophisticated network of money laundering, money, drugs, buying stuff, selling stuff, links to the criminal underworld. And so, you know, they use their education to actually, you know, make sure that it's an efficient operation in the same way that management would. They're not on the front line with the killing necessarily, but they are certainly using their education. And they are easily, well, not easily, but they can be persuaded. So that was that one, and that links into the second one, which again I've forgotten already. That was about
religious
education.
Yeah, religious extremism. How can we mitigate that?
I think, and there's a lot of work being done on that. It's about getting young people to look at ideology and understand ideology, and where it. I could have put some pictures on that we use. So that, you know, how do young people perceive a religious teaching or ideology? What's the difference between an ideology which is used by extremist groups and an ideology in general? So I think there's a lot of work to be done with young people understanding the role of ideology, how it's transmitted, and what the images are by which you transmit ideology. So if you have an ideology of hatred, then you transmit that by all sorts of social media, and it's increasingly sophisticated now, as you know, with all sorts of mechanisms, images, music, rap, ways in which that ideology of intolerance or hatred is transmitted. And it's trying to interrupt that process with young people. It's saying, what's going on? You know, just getting them to look at the pictures and say, what's going on here? What are they trying to tell you in this picture? So, you know, when you've got a picture of somebody with a machine gun saying you only die once because it's you know, you only live once, and the way they manipulate imagery of war and violence. So I think there's lots you can do without saying religion is bad or anything. It's saying, let's look at the role of ideology and how it's used and misused. And I think young people enjoy that. They like digging down. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Davis. Yeah, it does.
So Faryal has posted a question in the chat, and she's asking, do you think that societies where religion is not taught in schools are more tolerant people as compared to societies where religion is taught? Do we have any research on this?
I'd like to say yes, but I'm not, you know, I'd have to be careful here. It will depend entirely on how religion is taught. If religion is taught as a set of indisputable facts and moral messages and provides, you know, then it's difficult, I think, to get young people to be tolerant, because you're telling them all the time that this is truth, and therefore that people who don't believe in that truth there's something wrong with them, or they're substandard, or they don't understand the real truth. So if you have an authoritarian education which just does religious education as a series of truths, I think, you know, we have got enough evidence on that young people will be less tolerant. Whereas if you've got you know, secular education, I'm not saying you don't teach religion in schools. People always think, oh, you want, you know, religion to be banned in schools, and I'm going, no, I think it's important that it's there. It's important that young people learn about, as I said, ideology. It's important that they learn about the major religions and their histories and what they say and what they stand for, and how they are manipulated by some people. So I think it's important that they have that in schools. I wouldn't ban religion in schools, but I would ban religious teaching, which was simply authoritarian teaching. That makes sense?
Thank you. Professor Davis, you also, yes, it does. Thank you. Thank you. I'm really fascinated by this intervention of yours where you talked about a rights-based education. And I was wondering, what are some of the challenges that you have observed in implementing a rights-based education, especially in regions that are prone to conflict or radicalization? Yeah.
There are challenges, and it's more difficult in some places than others. I wouldn't dispute that. I've done a lot of work with UNICEF, and they have what they call rights respecting schools. Then you get an award, if you like, for being rights respecting. And they start very young with very young children to learn about their rights. And a lot of the parents will say, no, you can't do that. And, you know, and there can be a lot of misunderstanding of what a right is. So, you know, we had some horrible stories of kids sort of thinking they had the right just to go, what was it, urinate on a teacher's shoes? It's like, I mean, you know, you've got to make sure that they understand it's not a blanket thing. They've got a right to do anything. So you've got to work within the conventions, in particular, the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And a rights respecting school will make sure that every child, every parent, every ancillary worker, every teacher knows the rights of the child. So they know that the child has a right to respect, a child has a right to dignity, has a right to education and all of that. The more difficult ones, I think, are the right to dignity. There's a lot of teachers who don't think that children have a right to respect. You know, they're young. Why would they have a right? You know, I'm not going to respect a, you know, 11-year-old. Why would I respect them? And it's persuading teachers that the only way that you get young people to really understand equity and to understand rights is if the whole school is predicated around that rights, so that the teachers treat the children with respect, and then the children treat the teachers with respect. And that we know, and it works. It's astonishing how it works. But teachers, it takes some while to persuade teachers that they can treat children as almost, you know, as equals, because they're used to humiliating them. They're used to punishing them. They're used to, you know, sending them out. They're used to making rude comments about them. They don't understand the right to freedom from humiliation. But we know from the research that once teachers have cottoned on to the rights of the child and start treating young people as human beings, then the whole atmosphere of that school changes. And, you know, you will have young people who I think are resilient to violence, are resilient to hate, because they know that if they want to claim a right, the right to freedom from harm, then they have the responsibility for other people's freedom from harm. And that's drilled into them right from the beginning. No, it takes a while for teachers to get used to that, but it can be done.
Thank you, Professor. Professor, quite a few students are asking about, high school shootings and school shootings in the US. And that is also a conflict that education experiences. And what are your views on that?
Again, for high school shootings, I think I would come back to this question of family and guns and gun violence. I mean, it takes place everywhere. but it's that notion that it's okay to have a gun and it's okay. I think America is very, very bad on that, and there's a lot of campaigns, aren't there, about stopping gun violence, because I think that comes from families owning guns and kids using them and seeing that as normal. So again, it's what I said earlier on about the normalization of violence. That's what you do. And then from there, it's a bit like a spiral again, isn't it? From there, you think it's okay. But I don't know about you, but I find it difficult to get my head around why you would want to just go and massacre people. You know, I can understand actually extremism, you know, in the cause of an ideology more than I can just somebody who goes and shoots people in a school. You know, I'm baffled by it, quite honestly. I mean, the psychologists will look at family backgrounds and the need for status and the need for an identity and so on, and the copycat ones, you know, you copy a school shooting somewhere else. I don't know if you've got any ideas. I'm baffled by school shootings. I really am. I don't know what you do apart from, you know, legislation about guns.
So we have not experienced it as much in Pakistan, and other than in the context where some terrorists invade a school, but that is very different, and that is again ideology inspired. But you know, these high school shootings, they are very different. Maz Minhas has posted in the chat, and they're saying, thank you very much. It was a very insightful talk. You mentioned how countries with higher education tend to have lower armed conflicts. Now that is on the domestic front, I suppose. What about the relation of education of a people with their propensity to do harm on other people? I am pointing to the habit of invading others when it comes to the more educated countries.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I just think, and we're in the middle of we're in the middle of Israel, Palestine now. We were in the middle of Ukraine and Russia. You know, I don't think I've got anything significant to say. It's about you know, the role of education in that, because it goes back. I was looking at some of the research on curriculum in countries like Russia and in Israel, Palestine, and the curriculum where you're taught, you know, there's actually textbooks where, you know, you're taught about the enemy and you're taught about how to use, you know, guns, and you're taught about in school. So in that level, you can see the pathway up to higher education and how you never get people to be resilient. But no, I just think the higher education doesn't protect. I mean, it doesn't really protect you against ideology. It doesn't protect you against harm, and it's very easy to be swung into something. So I don't know. I haven't got much sensible to say about higher education and the current lot of conflicts. I think it will probably come out, but I don't know what the educational level in Gaza was. I mean, obviously not as high as in Israel itself, but you end up with just revenge attacks anyway.
Yes. Professor Asma is asking a question: how can we make balanced ideology for teaching religion and reducing extremism, instilling more sense of sensitivity in society and making individuals more tolerant? I think you've touched upon it already, but if you want to elaborate further.
Yeah, well, I think I'll repeat myself, if I may. I know we always want to make societies more tolerant, but I think you need this basis to say, what are we going to tolerate and what are we not going to tolerate? And for me, a rights-based education gives you that framework. It says we don't tolerate violence, we don't tolerate harm, we don't tolerate that. I don't care whose religion it is, I don't care whose ethnicity it is. Those are the things that we don't tolerate, and these we can, you know, makes no difference. You can go ahead and, you know, wear what you like and do what you like on this one. The problem is that people switch over to, you know, not tolerating certain sorts of dress and dress codes and uniforms and so on, which is madness. So you've really got to have a good platform to say these are the things that, you know, we don't want to tolerate. we can tolerate any religious practice, or as long as it does no harm. If people want to do things and do on various sorts of celebrations and so on, that's fine if it does no harm. So that's always the benchmark, isn't it? They tolerate anything as long as it does no harm to anybody. All right, you can dispute some of that harm, but mostly it's pretty clear. So I think it's giving you the bedrock of what to tolerate, and saying, and getting kids to say, yeah, actually, I understand that. I'm not, I don't tolerate. Younger children, I don't tolerate violence and hitting my sister. But you've also got to say, I don't tolerate teachers hitting children either.
So Fatima is asking, terrorists are not born, but they are made. You have talked about the role of school and how curriculum can instill balance. But what role can a school policy play? How can we teach the teachers to be mindful in their methodology?
I think there's a role for teacher education, a huge role for teacher education in this one. Terrorists are not born, they are made. And it's not a sort of, as I said, it's not a continual pathway where terrorists will gradually, I mean, they're in and out and up and down and so on. So at what point that gets cemented into something is an interesting one. I think you can the school has to do no harm as well. So the school has to look at the curriculum. And for example, history curriculum. What does that tell you? Does it tell you that your government was right to do X, Y, and Z, and other people? Are there alternative versions of history? And some of, I think, the more exciting history curricula are those that present those alternative side-by-side versions of history and say, this is the version according to this lot, this is the version no, let's talk about that. Let's talk about those different versions of history and different versions of who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. And if you can get young people to see that history isn't just a single thing, there was a battle and it was won, and there was a king and they did that. But you can see that history is a series of compromises, a series of misunderstandings, if you like, or a series of understandings, and see that always there's more than one way of seeing that history. That's always for me a way forward, and there's some wonderful materials. You've got the similar one. We've got some wonderful materials called Teaching History and Ourselves, and it's got lots of visuals and videos and things looking at, say, the history of wars and what people said about it, who had the power to decide what was said, and who had the power to transmit that, and it's often the teachers. Again, it's a hard ask for teachers, isn't it, to dispute the government's view of war. And I've certainly found that in some countries I've worked in, that yes, the government doesn't like you having a view of a conflict that puts any blame whatsoever on the government. They want to be able to say that it was these terrorists or these people. So it's hard. It really is hard. But I think it's the only way forward. Is that, again, that complexity, isn't it? Complexity theory, integrative complexity, where you're always thinking, what's the alternative in seeing that. Am I making any sense at all today?
You are, yes. And Professor Davis, Noreen and Danish have asked a question that is very broad. It's one of the core questions, and they're asking you about the definition of religion, in a sense, where Noreen is saying, is religion not the name of core values or ethics? And Danish is asking how we see the word religion in this study. A religion which is practiced by people or written in literature. I would add, is feminism a religion? Is veganism a religion?
I think you'd have to say that a religion is something where you have some notion of the sacred and the mysterious, and some notion of a god or Allah or a collection of them. whereby there's a notion of worship. You have to say that person knows the truth and I must worship that person, or those gods from some countries, but mostly one God or Allah. And so religion for me is distinct from something like feminism, which doesn't have something that you pray to, and it doesn't have something where you are subsidiary to that God or Allah or religious leader. So it's got, for religion, it's got to have something where it's giving you an explanation of the world, but it's saying we don't know, and we don't know, and it's full of mysteries, and we can't explain why there is hunger and poverty because our God is a good God. And then, but there must be a reason why there is hunger and poverty and war and destruction. And our God has got it all right. So it's an unquestioning notion that in in a religion, you can still pray to a God, even though you're not even sure whether that's good for society. But there's that notion, I think, of trying to understand what's not understandable, and something about being sacred. So yeah, so vegetarianism isn't a religion, feminism isn't a religion. It might have some sort of ideology, but it's not about worship.
Professor, thank you, Professor. We are running out of time, but there are so many questions, so I'm just going to take 2 more, if that is okay with you. And Mariam Imtiaz is asking, would you agree that even secular education has not stopped or convinced educated persons to observe social incidents and even conflicts in a more neutral, non-prejudiced way?
It would depend entirely what was meant by secular education. I mean, it's such a huge field of what you might understand by that. Is it a secular education that bans religion? So if you look at, say communist Russia, in all those, it was all completely banned, wasn't it? You couldn't do religion, so it was all completely secular. But of course, it was replaced by something almost as almost as bad, as it were, replaced by adherence to the Communist Party and to the communist ideology. And they created their own little rituals, didn't they, around all that? So it depends what you understand by secular. In my book, I called it dynamic secularism. Okay, plug for the book, because I think secularism has to be dynamic. It's not a single thing that says no religion, or we just do will fates. It's got to be dynamic. It's got to say what can we learn? What can we take from different religions? I think the secular bit for me is always about keeping religion out of politics. I mean, we're very bad in England. We've got like 26 bishops in the House of Lords, which is appalling. But our House of Lords is full of people who are just there because they're bishops, and I think that's all wrong. But that's it's making sure that religion isn't automatically accepted as something that you do in terms of representation. So secular can find different ways to make their voices heard. There's a very good outfit in UK called British Muslims for a Secular Democracy. And these are Muslims that are saying, yeah, we want a secular democracy. We don't want religion taking over government. We want government to be free from religion of any sort. And we'll have a secular democracy, but we are British Muslims. We believe in our faith, but we don't believe in imposing that faith on a political worldview. So I think there are ways to do secularism which are enable young people to understand where a religious viewpoint is useful and where it simply clouds the issue by talking about what the Bible says or the Quran says or whatever. And where you need to get to the roots of conflict. And that was, I had a slide on that somewhere. And does religion enable you to do that?
Yeah. So the last question is from Kainat, and there is a bit of a context to this question because it's focused more on Pakistan. And Pakistan recently undertook this whole curriculum drive as well, where they kind of came up with this idea of single national curriculum, and where a lot of religion was added to, for primary education, secondary, and later grades as well. So Kainat is asking, how well do you think citizenship education and concentrated curriculum can help reduce extremism inside Pakistani schools? And how do we make it possible for policymakers and implementers to see extremism and current teaching of religion as something to be changed and improved for a better and sensitive society? So how do we, common people go to policymakers, and how do we convince them that, this is a recipe for disaster?
You said that, not me. You're not saying citizenship is a recipe for disaster. No.
No. But the addition of a lot of religious curriculum.
Yeah. No, I mean, the citizenship one's an interesting one because that's been plugged by all the major international organizations, global citizenship, and the idea that, we are global citizens and that we share, again, rights and responsibilities. And so that's, I think that's an important one. But no, I would be uneasy about more religion because it crowds out other stuff, doesn't it? It crowds out what you should be doing. I mean, it's hard enough, I don't know about in Pakistan, but it's hard enough in UK to do the sort of work that we're doing on critical thinking and evidence and fake news, and absolutely critical that young people are understanding media and media literacy and not being swayed by conspiracy theories. So there's massive work to do with young people around, and teachers. I mean, I know teachers who are completely gone down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theory. I mean, believing we have a global elite and we have, we have this and we have that. And, I think there's an awful lot of work. And if you start crowding the curriculum out with standard religious education, you haven't got room for much else. And also it can conflict with critical thinking, can't it? Yeah. So young people either see it as a waste of time, or they just don't do it at all. So it's a waste of time and money. But that's my view.
Thank you so very much, Professor Davis. It was an absolute honor speaking to you. We've gone 5 minutes over, but this whole conversation, your presentation, it was really enlightening. And thank you so very much. If you have any final words before we end the meeting.
Can I just say I really, really appreciated all your questions. You never quite know what an audience is going to up. They're really good questions and inspired questions, and they made me think, and I couldn't answer a lot of them, and my apologies if I couldn't answer your questions, because they were good questions and they came at me from all sides. So I wanted to thank you and to congratulate all your students on the the depth of their thinking around these very complicated issues, and congratulate them on their desire to see a better world and to see a better place, and how you get there. So I said my congratulations to the students and to their lecturers.
Thank you. You're very kind, and I hope you have a very good day. Thank you.
And you have a good. Oh, it's over for you now, isn't it? Yeah. You can all go home now.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Let me know. I mean, do keep in touch if you have any questions or anything you want to.
Yes, we will email you. Thank you.
I don't guarantee to. Okay.
Bye.
All right. That's nice. Oh, chat room.